Okay, so now that we've seen the basic features and the limitations that they have, let's start talking about the cool stuff. And we'll begin by talking about factory methods. Remember, there are a bunch of different advanced features in completable futures, and the first one we'll talk about is the factory method. As I said before, there's a bunch of things. We talked about the basic methods. We're about to talk about factory methods, and then we'll talk about the other ones as we go along. A factory method initiates asynchronous computations. So that's where we're going to start. As you can see, there are 4 factory methods that are defined in the completable future interface, and they implement a variant of the gang of 4 factory method pattern, which separates the creation of something from its use. The computations that are created with these factory methods may or may not return a value. It all depends on which of the variants of the factory methods that you happen to use. Supply async is a factory method that allows two-way calls. In other words, a value will be returned back via a supplier. And you can see here that there's 2 different supply async methods. They both take suppliers, which is the thing you want to have run in the background, and one of them also takes an executor. So what happens here is that both of them will return a completable future that, when complete, will return the result of doing the supplier computation. The first one, the one on the top, will asynchronously run the supplier in the common fork join pool. The second one will run the supplier in the given executor. So whatever thread pool you associate with that executor, that's what's going to be used to execute that supplier. And then a result will come back. One of the things you can do here, even though suppliers, quote, don't take parameters, you can pass them in as effectively final variables. So here we have an example similar to what we looked at before with our program that multiplied big fractions. We can say supply async, and then we can pass in F1 and F2, which are defined in some outer scope. And F1 and F2 are so-called effectively final objects because they don't change from the point where they're initialized to where they're used. And we can use them to multiply the results together. The second type of factory method for completable futures is called RunAsync. And these allow one-way calls to be submitted. So unlike supply async, where you get a result back, in this case, you just give it a runnable, which, as you recall, doesn't return a value, and it goes ahead and runs in the background. So once again, there's 2 different variants. They both take runnables. The second, RunAsync, takes an executor. They don't return anything. They give back a completable future with a result of void, which means you can just know when it's done, but you can't get a result back from it. And as before, the first variant of RunAsync runs in the common fork join pool. The second variant runs in the given executor pool. Here's a simple example, much the same as before. Once again, we're going to go ahead and perform these operations. And notice that void is not a value, so it just says we're not returning anything here. And in this case, any output we have here has to come from side effects. So in this case, this computation has the side effect of printing the results of multiplying big fraction 1 by big fraction 2 and converting it to a mixed string. The async functionality runs in a thread pool, and you can see there's a couple different variants, as I mentioned before. By default, you get the common fork join pool, but you can also give the executor specifically if you so choose. So that's just a quick overview of the factory methods. I think you'll agree that they're fairly straightforward, and we'll take a look at how to use them in just a second.